So I'd like to talk to you today about the study of politics, the study of public policy, and what public policy is and why we study it. So, to start with an example, every year people visit amusement parks. And they visit amusement parks for fun, but every year people get injured at amusement parks. Some, though a very small number, die. And though this may seem like an absurd example, we then have to ask ourselves the question: what kind of controls or regulations are necessary to ensure that individuals are safe at amusement parks? That you can ensure that when you go to a place like Disney World or Universal Studios or Cedar Point, that you're not actually putting yourself at any terrible risk. Well, government can play a role in regulating things like amusement parks and automobile safety to ensure that uh, that there is safe travel when you're operating an automobile, and doing things that are, of course, risky by nature, like operating an automobile or riding a steel roller coaster or bungee jumping or something like that. So different areas are regulated by different entities. So we have like the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission regulates traveling rides, not the ones at like Cedar Point, but ones that go from um, uh, fair to fair. Permanent rides are up to the states to regulate, and some require inspections and others don't. So, of course, you have rides that get shut down for a period of time because they've been inspected and considered not safe until something is fixed about them. And these are generally good regulations to have because we don't want to see people getting hurt when they're going to a place to have fun. So uh, the question then becomes: should we be concerned by the number of people hurt on amusement park rides? Well, policy analysts help us determine this because what is an important policy issue, what dominates our political discussion, really depends on uh, how, on what is important to us and what uh, what there's enough damage done by in order to warrant some kind of policy solution. If no one is ever hurt on uh, roller coasters, and if the regulations we have in place and the inspections we have in place are working, and people aren't getting hurt, then this isn't a big policy issue that we need to be concerned about. The system is working just fine. If the Federal Aviation Administration is doing a good job of overseeing the airline industry, we don't have planes falling out of the sky, then changes probably don't really need to be made. And if the risk is very small and the stories of the headlines in the papers indicate that that things don't happen very often, so say there aren't many injuries, you're no more likely to be injured getting out of bed in the morning and going to exercise than you are riding a roller coaster, then roller coasters aren't really a problem. So how do we determine what is a problem and what isn't? What's a policy problem and what is not? Well, policy analysts help us determine this. If when analysts look at who is being injured, what number of people are being injured on roller coasters compared to what number of people are dying because of cancer due to cigarette smoking, then what you find is that we have a health policy issue when it comes to cigarette smoking, and not so much the amusement parks. Analysts determine what is a policy problem, and also what kind of solutions can be done. So, what is public policy? Public policy is what public officials within government, and by extension the citizens they represent, choose to do or not do about a policy problem. So, um, we see that smoking causes cancer. We want to create incentives to keep people from smoking. And there are a number of different policy solutions for doing that. We go, okay, well, we want a healthy community. What can we do to dissuade people from smoking cigarettes? Well, we can put warnings on the boxes, make sure that there's an awareness that, yes, these things are detrimental to your health. We can do what they call the sin tax, and we can tax something to the extent that it becomes very costly for somebody to buy it, and maybe that will motivate them to kick this bad habit that ultimately is a strain on not only their own bodies, but also the healthcare system and the general well-being of the public. So public problems are those conditions under which the public widely perceives as unacceptable and therefore require intervention. So to use another example, if the public feels like the number of school shootings or shootings at movie theaters or public shootings is unacceptable, then this becomes a policy problem. And this is why you see our politicians often talking about gun policy and background checks and restricting the types of guns that can be sold to the general public. It's because the public views this as a policy problem. If we didn't have a disproportionate number of shootings compared to other advanced liberal democracies, maybe we wouldn't see this come up as a policy problem in the eyes of the public. Let's see. So policy. What is policy then? Policy is a purposive course of action that an individual or group consistently follows in dealing with a problem. Now, oftentimes we use the terms policy and law interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable. Laws are passed by a legislature. Something is the law. It's signed into law, and laws are part of policy. But policy also includes other types of laws. So you have the actual laws that are passed through a legislature, some kind of governing body, and signed by an executive. You have executive orders, the things that presidents sign to take action without Congress on something within the scope of the executive office. Regulations that are created by the bureaucracy. So the Federal Aviation Administration creates regulations that the airline industry has to live by, that kind of thing. The Education Department creates regulations that public schools have to abide by. And judicial rulings. So judicial rulings being cases brought to the Supreme Court when people challenge people challenge in court that their rights have been violated. So things like the high-profile ones like Roe v. Wade or Citizens United, that's policy too. The Supreme Court is creating policy by making their decision. So policy can include all of those things: laws, executive orders, regulations, judicial rulings. Let's define a couple of other concepts. Government is made up of the institutions and political processes through which public policy choices are made. So we figure out what the policy solutions are for a public problem through institutions like Congress, your state legislature, or the national legislature. Politics is the exercise of power in a society or in specific decisions over public policy. So put another way, it's who gets what, when, and how. So it's about power. And policy analysis, the study of public policy, is the examination of components of public policy, the policy process, or both. The study of the causes of policy problems and the consequences of policy decisions. So when we do a study on uh, do states with early voting uh, have higher voter turnout than states without early voting? That is policy analysis. We're analyzing this policy that allows people to vote before election day and what the outcome of that is. Um, uh, so why study public policy? Well, analysts study public policy to develop policy solutions and policy alternatives that could solve public problems. Scholars do too. So a policy analyst working for a think tank or some kind of other political group, or possibly the government, they're looking for ways to solve policy problems. Scholars do a little bit of that, but scholars are also interested in advancing knowledge and advancing theory. So understanding theories that explain what the policy process is. So there's less of a focus on solving a policy problem, and you have to remember that think tanks are not ideologically objective. They have a policy agenda, so they're looking to propose solutions that fit that agenda too. We'll talk about that later. So scholars have this ability to be a little bit more objective in their analysis of politics, of public policy, because they don't really have as much skin in the game as people from other organizations. So studying public policy can help improve citizen engagement. We can find out the connections between our policy and our policy problems, and what policies could possibly solve those policy problems. And by disseminating that knowledge, we can shape the public discourse and possibly create positive change when it comes to our government and our society. The last thing I'd like to cover is some of the contexts of public policy. So there's social context, economic context, political context, governing context, and cultural context. Social context includes demographics, so policy implications of senior citizens, making up a large part of our population. So we talk a lot about Medicare and Social Security, and one of the reasons that gets so much attention in public policy is because we have a bubble of older people in society. There's one of the largest groups is people over 65, and those demographics push our policy discourse. You don't see a whole lot of public policy issues aimed at solving the problems of young people. Young people don't vote in the same kind of numbers that older people do. There are a lot of really old people, and they vote. So that shapes the context of our public policy. There's also economic context, so the economy matters. A strong economy with lower unemployment would mean less need for unemployment benefits and job training programs, and so you wouldn't need to propose as many new job training programs or policies that are going to address high unemployment if there's low unemployment. Political context: Democrats and Republicans hold sharply different views on the role of government. Overall, Americans, Democrats and Republicans, agree on the foundations of the system of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the free market. Overall, those things, capitalism, are really well ingrained into society. But you do see very different proposals coming out of the Democratic and Republican Party. So that will definitely shape public policy, the political context. If you elect somebody who's if you elect somebody president who's very conservative, you're going to get very different policy solutions than if you elect somebody who's very liberal. There's growing number of people identifying as democratic socialists, like Bernie Sanders supporters. So maybe the agreement in the underpinnings of democracy will eventually fade, but for the most part, the vast majority of Americans believe in the underpinnings of capitalism. And I think I said democracy a moment ago. I meant capitalism, since socialism, capitalism, yeah, not so much democracy thing. So there's also governing context. There's separation of powers that influences the kind of public policy you get that comes out of the system. President Trump can't just dictate what he wants to do across the board. The Supreme Court can strike down actions of the executive. All of the separation of powers for shapes our public policy and our discussion of public policy. Federalism also plays a role. Federalism, there's a role for the states to play. In some states, casino gambling is legal. In some states, it's not. These differences and then how those state governments interact with the national government, those things all matter in how we discuss public policy. And then, of course, there's cultural beliefs, our widely held values, beliefs, attitudes, distrust in government. Some of the things I was talking about earlier with underpinnings of democracy and life and liberty, and these cultural things about what it means to be an American and what it means to live in an American society, that also they shape the context of our public policy. And so those are the things that our public policy is influenced by when it comes to the context. Social context, economic context, political context, governing context, and cultural context. And that's all I have for now.